The autumn of 1884 brought early snow to the Colorado high country, catching travelers unprepared and transforming familiar trails into deadly obstacles. But for Jessie Monroe, a 22-year-old ranch hand's daughter traveling alone through the mountains, that unexpected blizzard would bring her to the doorstep of a man whose life was as isolated as the cabin he called home, and whose heart was about to be opened by the most unexpected request he'd ever received. Jessie had been riding for 3 days, delivering breeding papers to a ranch 50 miles north of her father's spread, when the storm came up faster than the weather had predicted. She'd been trying to reach the trading post at Miller's Crossing when her beloved mare Dancer stepped wrong on an ice-covered rock and went down hard, her front leg buckling with a sickening crack that told Jessie everything she needed to know about how bad the injury was. Now, with snow falling so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead and her horse unable to bear weight on her injured leg, Jessie faced a terrible choice. Try to continue on foot through a blizzard that would likely kill them both, or find shelter and hope the storm passed before Dancer's injury became untreatable. That's when she saw smoke rising through the trees, the blessed sign of human habitation in a wilderness that showed no mercy to the stranded or unprepared. Jessie half led, half dragged her limping horse through the deepening snow toward that smoke, using every ounce of strength her small frame possessed to keep Dancer moving despite the mare's obvious agony. By the time she reached the cabin clearing, Jessie was exhausted, frozen, and terrified that she'd lost the horse who had been her closest companion since childhood. The cabin was substantial, not the rough trapper's shack she'd expected, but a well-built log home with a barn and corrals suggesting someone lived here year-round, rather than just using it as a seasonal camp. Jessie could see lamplight through the windows and smoke from the chimney, signs of warmth and safety that seemed like salvation after hours in the killing cold. She stumbled to the door and pounded on it with numb fists, her voice breaking as she called out, "Please, I need help! My horse is injured in the storm. Please, is anyone there?" The door opened to reveal a man who took Jessie's breath away despite her desperation. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, dark hair showing threads of silver at the temples, and striking blue eyes that widened with surprise at finding a half-frozen woman and an injured horse on his doorstep in the middle of a blizzard. "Good God," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Get inside before you freeze to death. Your horse, too. The barn's got space and it's heated." And that's when you realize this isn't just a rescue story. It's about 2 isolated souls discovering they've been waiting their whole lives for exactly this moment, which is exactly why you should hit that subscribe button right now, because watching how this virgin cowgirl and lonely rancher heal each other while saving her beloved horse will prove that the best love stories begin with desperate circumstances and unexpected connections. The man's name was Caleb Stone, and as he helped Jessie settle Dancer in his warm barn, she learned that he was 36 years old, had been living alone in this mountain cabin for 8 years, and possessed knowledge about horse injuries that suggested he'd spent considerable time around animals, despite his obvious isolation. "It's a fracture," Caleb said after examining Dancer's leg with gentle, expert hands. "Not compound, which is good, but bad enough that she'll need complete rest and careful treatment if she's going to heal properly. Most people would put a horse down for an injury like this." Jessie felt tears freeze on her cheeks at his words. "Please don't say that. Dancer's been with me since I was 14. She's not just a horse, she's my best friend. I'll do anything to save her, pay any price, work off any debt. Just please, please help me save her." Caleb looked at this young woman who was shaking from cold and exhaustion, but still putting her horse's welfare above her own comfort, and something shifted in his carefully constructed solitude. "I'm not going to put her down. I'm going to do everything possible to save her leg, but it's going to take weeks, maybe months, and it's going to require constant care and attention. Can you stay that long?" Jessie met his eyes with desperate gratitude. "I can stay as long as it takes. I'll work for my keep, cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. Just let me stay until Dancer can travel safely again. But you haven't seen the most important part yet." Over the following days, As the blizzard raged outside and Dancer began the long process of healing, Jesse and Caleb fell into a partnership born from necessity, but deepening into something neither had expected. Caleb showed her how to splint and wrap Dancer's leg, how to mix poultices that reduced swelling and prevented infection, how to keep the mare calm and still during the critical early days when any wrong move could worsen the fracture. In return, Jesse transformed Caleb's bachelor cabin from a place of mere survival into something that felt almost like a home. She cooked meals that actually tasted good instead of just providing fuel. She organized his chaotic supplies into sensible systems, and most importantly, she filled his isolated existence with conversation, laughter, and the kind of companionship he'd forgotten could exist. "Why do you live up here alone?" Jesse asked one evening as they sat by the fire after checking on Dancer for the 10th time that day. "This cabin's too nice to be just a trapper's camp, and you clearly know how to work with horses. Why isolate yourself from everyone?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. 8 years ago, I was engaged to be married. Beautiful woman, good family, everything seemed perfect. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out she'd been lying to me about everything. She was already married to someone else, was planning to commit bigamy, and only wanted me for the inheritance I'd just received from my grandfather. He paused, old pain evident in his voice. When I confronted her, she claimed I'd been the one pursuing her despite knowing she was married, that I was obsessed and dangerous. Her real husband believed her lies and came after me with half the town backing him up. I left before someone got killed, came up here to get away from people and their lies and their judgments, and I've been alone ever since. Jessie felt her heart ache for this man who had been so badly betrayed that he'd chosen complete isolation over risking trust again. "Not everyone lies, Caleb. Some of us tell the truth even when it's hard." Caleb looked at her, seeing sincerity in her young face. "What hard truth would you tell me, Jessie Monroe?" Jessie took a breath, deciding honesty was the only way forward. "The truth that I'm 22 years old and I've never been kissed, never been courted, never been anything except my father's unpaid ranch hand, because he wanted sons, but got me instead. The truth that I'm good with horses and terrible with people, that I'd rather sleep in a barn than attend a social, and that most men look right past me because I'm too plain and too independent to be worth their attention." Wait. Don't miss what happens next. Caleb stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Jessie, you're not plain. You're beautiful. The kind of beautiful that doesn't need fancy dresses or careful grooming because it comes from who you are rather than how you look. And any man who looks past you is a fool who doesn't deserve your attention anyway." Jessie felt her cheeks flush with more than just firelight. "You're just being kind because I'm stuck here and you feel obligated." "I'm being honest because you deserve honesty," Caleb corrected. "These past weeks with you here have reminded me what it feels like to have someone to talk to, someone to share meals with, someone who makes this cabin feel like more than just a place where I hide from the world. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing, Jessie. And that has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with who you are." The confession hung between them like morning mist, impossible to ignore but too delicate to examine directly. They were falling in love, this isolated man and this independent young woman, brought together by an injured horse and a blizzard, discovering that sometimes the best relationships grow in the most unlikely places. As weeks turned into a month and Dancer's leg showed promising signs of healing, the relationship between Caleb and Jessie deepened in ways that went beyond simple companionship. They worked together caring for Dancer, splitting wood for the fire, managing Caleb's small herd of cattle, and gradually opening their hearts to the possibility that isolation might not be the answer to past pain. Jessie learned that Caleb wasn't just knowledgeable about horses, he was brilliant with them, possessing an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that made him one of the best trainers she'd ever seen. Under his careful treatment, Dancer's leg healed better than Jessie had dared hope, the mare gradually regaining strength and mobility that most people would have thought impossible after such a serious fracture. Caleb learned that Jessie's independence and skill with horses came from years of trying to prove her worth to a father who had never quite forgiven her for being born female instead of male. She'd worked twice as hard as any ranch hand, learned everything there was to know about breeding and training horses, and had earned a reputation throughout Colorado as someone whose word could be trusted and whose expertise was genuine. "Your father's a fool," Caleb said one afternoon as they watched Dancer take her first unassisted steps in the barn. "You're worth 10 sons, and any man too blind to see that doesn't deserve your respect or your love." Jessie turned to look at him, seeing more than just anger on her behalf. She saw a man who had come to value her in ways her own father never had. "Caleb, when Dancer's fully healed and I have to leave, what happens then? What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next." Caleb had been dreading this question since the day Jessie arrived, knowing that eventually her horse would heal and she would leave, taking with her the light and warmth that had transformed his isolated existence into something worth living. "I suppose you go back to your father's ranch and resume your life there." "What if I don't want to go back?" Jessie asked quietly. "What if I've discovered that living here, working with you, being valued for who I am instead of resented for who I'm not, what if that's made me realize I don't want to go back to a place where I'll never be good enough?" Caleb's heart pounded with hope he was afraid to fully embrace. "What are you saying, Jessie?" Jessie stepped closer to him, her young face showing both nervousness and determination. "I'm saying that when I came here desperate for help, you gave me more than just veterinary care for my horse. You gave me respect, companionship, and the first time in my life when someone made me feel valued for exactly who I am. And she took a shaking breath. "I know I'm young and inexperienced. I know you've been hurt badly by someone who lied to you. But I'm asking you to take a chance on someone who's never lied to you, never will lie to you, and who's fallen completely in love with you, despite knowing it probably makes me a fool." Caleb pulled her into his arms, this brave young woman who had crashed into his isolated life, and reminded him that not everyone betrayed trust, that not all relationships ended in lies and pain, and that sometimes the greatest risks led to the greatest rewards. "You're not a fool, Jessie. You're the bravest person I've ever met. And I love you too, not because you're young or inexperienced, but because you're honest, skilled, kind, and you've shown me that isolation isn't protection. It's just another form of dying." Their first kiss was gentle and patient, Caleb aware of Jessie's inexperience and determined to make her first romantic experience something beautiful rather than rushed or awkward. When they finally pulled apart, Jessie was smiling through happy tears. "I've never been kissed before," she admitted unnecessarily. "Was I terrible at it?" Caleb laughed, a sound that had been absent from his life for 8 years, but now came naturally in her presence. "You were perfect, and I promise every kiss from now on will be just as good or better, because we have all the time in the world to practice." The proposal came naturally during a spring morning 3 months after Jessie's arrival, when Dancer was finally fully healed and capable of making the journey back to civilization. Caleb had been dreading this day, knowing Jessie was technically free to leave, but hoping desperately that she would choose to stay. "Jessie," he said as they stood together watching Dancer prance around the corral, clearly proud of her recovered strength. "Your horse is healed. You could leave today if you wanted to. But I'm asking, no, I'm begging you to stay. Not as my guest or my employee, but as my wife, my partner, and the person who makes this mountain cabin feel like the home I never thought I'd have again." He pulled out a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Marry me, Jessie Monroe. Let me spend my life proving that choosing me wasn't a mistake, that isolation doesn't have to be permanent, and that love can heal wounds deeper than any broken bone. Help me build a horse breeding operation that will be the best in Colorado, raise a family in this beautiful place, and never doubt for a single day that you're valued, cherished, and loved exactly as you are." Jessie threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, Caleb Stone. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you in this beautiful, isolated place that feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. And yes, I'll spend every day grateful that Dancer broke her leg and led me to exactly where I was supposed to be." The wedding took place in the mountain meadow behind Caleb's cabin on a perfect June morning, with Dancer serving as the only witness besides a traveling preacher who made his annual circuit through the high country. When the preacher asked if Caleb took Jessie as his wife, his answer rang across the mountains with absolute conviction. "I take this woman who crashed into my isolation and reminded me how to live again. I promise to value her independence, nurture her dreams, and never forget that she chose me when she could have chosen anyone. I promise to be the partner who sees her strength rather than expecting her weakness, who celebrates her skills rather than resenting them, and who spends every day grateful that a blizzard and an injured horse brought her to my door." Jessie's vows were equally powerful. "Caleb, you saved Dancer's life when most men would have given up. You saved my spirit when I'd almost stopped believing I had value beyond what work I could do. You've shown me that isolation isn't the same as peace, that walls built to protect hearts end up imprisoning them instead, and that the bravest thing we can do is risk loving again when love has hurt us before. I promise to be honest always, to value your heart as the precious gift it is, and to build with you a life where both of us are valued for exactly who we are." Years passed, and the Stone Ranch became known throughout Colorado Territory as the premier location for horse breeding and training, built on the partnership between Caleb's expertise and Jessie's natural gift with animals. Dancer lived to be 28 years old, producing a line of exceptional horses that carried her legacy across the Western Territories. Jessie and Caleb raised 4 children in that mountain cabin, 2 daughters who inherited their mother's independence and skill with horses, and 2 sons who learned from their father that real strength meant choosing gentleness over force. All of them grew up understanding that their parents' love story began with an injured horse and a desperate plea, proving that the best relationships often start in the most unlikely ways. On their 20th anniversary, as they watched their children working with the horses in the training corrals, Jessie reflected on the day she'd stumbled through the snow to Caleb's door. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the storm had driven me to someone else's cabin? Some other rancher who might not have been willing to help." Caleb pulled her close, this woman who had transformed his isolated existence into a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. "I try not to think about it, because imagining you anywhere but here, with anyone but me, makes my heart hurt. But mostly I just thank God that the storm brought you to my door instead of someone else's, because saving your horse led me to the woman who saved my life in return." "Best worst day of my life," Jessie said, kissing him while their children pretended not to notice. "Worst because Dancer broke her leg and I thought I'd lose her. Best because it brought me to you and showed me what real love looks like, the kind that values who you are instead of resenting what you're not." If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the best love stories often begin with desperate circumstances and that isolation is never the answer to past pain, then you found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of unexpected meetings, healing partnerships, and love that grows from the courage to risk your heart again when trust has been broken. From mountain cabins to horse corrals, every story we tell proves that the most beautiful relationships are built not on perfect circumstances, but on the willingness to help when help is needed and to love when love seems impossible. This is where isolated hearts find connection, where injured horses lead to healed souls, and where love proves that the bravest thing we can do is choose vulnerability over protection.